Well, good morning, good evening, or good night, depending on where you are in the world today. This is Unprecedented with Raine and Steph, our second episode live streamed on the Wellness Lifestyle Conference channel. And today we have a very interesting topic that is kind of a follow on from last week's. And we've decided to title this, or Raine actually came up with the brilliant title, I should say, of Broken Wings. And today's topic is all about honesty and trust in the universe and in ourselves. And where do we start with that? Where do we begin and where do we end? And Rain, you just said something so profound as we were about to go live. Maybe do you want to share it? Because I don't want to take the thunder.
Well, oh, wonderful. Thank you, Stefan, and good morning, good evening to you and to everyone as well. When we think of trust and we think of honesty, I think a lot of thoughts fire off in our brain.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one thing that we can agree on that is probably one of the predominant thoughts is trust tied in with others. So it always seems to be that we put our trust in what others say to us, what others do, what they think of us, all of those things. I think even the biggest um, narcissist will have a moment of thinking about that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's just, I don't know. I think it's in our DNA. Wouldn't you agree that maybe it's just the reality that it's in our DNA and it's part of our humanity,
Yes.
right? And so the challenge is just as you said, where do we end and where do we begin?
Mm,
So what are your thoughts on you know where do we end and where do we begin, because there's a lot there. First of all, we're if we want to be honest, and above board here, we need to look at the current state of things, the current
mm-hmm.
situation, whatever is going on first, before we can look at it and say, well, do I really honestly trust how I'm feeling about this right now, for example? Do I am feeling this way, but is that the truth? Is that real? Is that raw? Is it where things really are at, you know?
Gosh, so you've, in just a couple of sentences, you've brought up such a lot for me because so the first thing that kind of really struck me was when you said it's part of of who we are as humans, right? That we do think about what others think about us. And
Hmm.
this was always a little bit of an issue for me growing up because this was something that my mother would always quote to me from the Bible, right? Which is you should always put the I can't read the exact scripture, and it's in the Greek scriptures though, where it says you should put the needs of your fellow man ahead of your own, right? And
That's right. That's
that
right.
would always be quoted to me as, well, you've got to take other people's feelings into account before you do things. And my response would always be, okay, but where does accountability end for me? And where does accountability start for somebody else? Because you can't please everyone, right? So if I'm making one person
No,
happy, I'm obsessing somebody else. That's just the nature
that's right.
of polarity in the world in which we live.
Mhm.
And then I think further to that, like you just said, being honest with ourselves about what we're feeling, because I do believe that scripture specifically was not talking about anything that could be construed as self-sabotage, right, or self-destructive. But certainly, when we,
Right.
if we don't
And
know
that's
ourselves.
interesting that you
Mhm.
Well,
Sorry, please
that's
continue.
interesting that you had that type of experience. That's interesting that you had that type of experience as a child. I mean, that is huge. And having raised children myself, we're, we teach our children. We're trying to teach them values and
Mhm.
morals and all those sorts of things. But to um, even piggyback on that in a sense is as a mother, you go through so much sacrifice in your lifetime when you're raising children. You you're always putting their needs, your children's needs, above yours. And so it's something that ends up being a conditioned experience just in the
Yes.
experience itself.
Yes, absolutely. And then it does then kind of
So
you
you
start to then
learned.
wonder about around the whole honesty thing is when you're putting other people's needs ahead of your own, like you were saying, as a mother, for instance, where where does that end? You know, where are you okay if you were able to be completely honest with yourself and
Mhm,
truthful? Where does that
mhm.
need to take someone else's requirements into account end, and where does being true to yourself begin?
Right. And what happens is all of this, because it does have a certain conditioning effect to it. You know, the words you heard, words are powerful. The
Mm-hmm.
words you read, the words were spoken to you from your mom, um, lay that conditioning down inside of us. And as a mom, you know, um, giving up a lot of things that we may like to pursue as we're raising our children, say in career, or it could even be so much of as you wanting to get a new outfit, but then the kids need something for school. So now you're not getting that outfit. You may never end up getting, because it's kind of like a just vicious cycle. It just never
Yeah.
ends, right? And then if you throw in, marital breakups in the mix and all that kind of stuff, then now the plot thickens. It really gets heavy. But not only that, we fall into this pattern that whereby now we are always considering others. We
Mm,
are if our parents don't want to do this, or they don't want us to do that, then we're listening to them. And you've mentioned your friends. You bounce a lot of things off your friends often. And even with that, we can then say, well, so and so, my friend, said that I shouldn't really be doing this, or I shouldn't be thinking that way. So we can what really ends up happening is our identity is being developed further, as we're a child, and then into our teenage years, and then into our adult years. Our identity is being developed, and it's our interaction with others and the words that are spoken to us. It's all of the information that's flooding in. It's what we hear on the news. It's what we're reading. Everything is affecting us, right? So then we have to ask ourselves, where
oh, goodness. Rain. Hello. To our viewers, apologies. We seem to have lost Rain there for a second, but I think we're going to get her back shortly. Rain, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, you dropped off there for a second, but you're back now.
Oh, so really, we need to ask ourselves, where does our brokenness lie? If there is brokenness there, where does our brokenness lie? Because again, as you had mentioned, it all begins with those seeds that are planted very young.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So where does it end and where does it begin? That's a really good example or statement of, it begins very young, when we're a child, right?
Yes, for sure.
So
For
how
sure.
did you flip that? Like, how did you turn that around
Well,
for
for
yourself?
me, and I think this is why your title of Broken Wings kind of resonated so deeply with me. For me, it was a case of I didn't really flip that script for a very long time. I pushed against it to a large degree because I had sufficient self awareness to know that what others wanted from me was not necessarily what was best for me. So I did kind of have a bit of a pushback,
Right.
um, in that I could sense that quite literally my wings were broken. I was not able to soar the way that I wanted to and the way that I should be able to. And it wasn't until I realized that honesty with self and trust in the universe does not negate pain. So for me, that was realizing that if I step into my power, if I'm really open and honest with who I am and what my purpose is,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to upset some people. And that is going to be hurtful to them.
That's
And by
right.
extension, because I'm empathetic, it's going to be painful for me as well to see them going through that hurt.
Right.
But,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I'm coming back
And
to the self.
you're going to feel some of that pain as well,
Yeah,
right? You're going to feel some
absolutely.
of that backlash of pain as well. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But the reality of it is that we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to be true to ourselves, because we can go our whole life, or lives, pleasing others. And Joyce Myers, she's an evangelical minister, and I'm sure you're familiar with her.
Hmm.
She's written probably 40 books, and she talks a lot about that. She actually has a book about people pleasing, and that is what we can fall into, is that people pleasing piece, and we have to stop that at some point. And you're right, it is not going to sit well with everyone when we
No.
claim who we are and what is important to us. It's not going to sit well with everyone, for sure.
But this is to me where that self awareness comes in, because what can so often happen is the people around us can package their hurt as concern for us, as, oh, I'm worried
That's
about
right.
you because you're going down this path that we perceive to be detrimental. If, however, you are
Mm-hmm.
sufficiently self aware, you are able to have open, honest
Mm-hmm.
discussions internally with your soul, with God, with the universe, then you can actually be comfortable in your decision, comfortable enough to know that you're making the right decision. But if you don't have that portion, if you don't have that deep self trust and that intense self honesty, that brutal honesty, then it's very easy to just fall back into or back onto, oh, well, let's just rely on what everybody else wants me to do and thinks I should do.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that can have a huge impact on your health. It can have a huge impact on your career, the work that you decide to do, because you're not making decisions that are best for yourself. Like you say, what is best for you? What is your absolute best choice? And
Oh,
we're
yes.
all different, and this is it's part of almost like a control thing as well sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
where you know um, I've heard of, I've had many clients come to me and say, like, their children aren't talking to them, or their parents aren't talking to them, or their best friend isn't talking to them anymore. And so, it can be, part of it can be control. It could be immaturity, an emotional
Mm-hmm.
immaturity, or a mental imbalance or unhealth. So there's a lot of ways that can come across to you. And if we're really being, let's just, this is a really cool way to look at it, is, let's say if someone gets into an accident and they have a head injury, and they have a head injury in their frontal lobe. And what ends up happening then is that they cannot retain information.
Mm-hmm.
So they cannot retain anything from the past. They live in the moment, and they're always in the moment, in the present moment. So let's say that person had people that hurt them in the past, and that person comes to visit them. They don't remember. Guess what? They just don't remember. They don't remember anything from the past. So they're giving that person a fresh and clean slate every single time that they come into
Right.
contact with them. And that That's almost the way that we should be looking at life and looking at things. In most
Hmm.
cases, not in all cases, where there's harm, of course, you want to be able to retain that memory so that you can protect yourself. But in most cases, how refreshing is that? Because then that's where we begin. It's a new beginning every time, right? So we are allowing and permitting that person to be who they are, in the spirit of who they are, and they likewise allow us to be who we are. And then that momentum, the momentum of trust with the universe, can happen naturally because it's there, right? We have to remember that the universe has our back. And so that trust is built in then into that momentum, if that makes sense.
It does indeed, but I'm getting a little bit of a download here in that as you were talking about, visiting someone who's maybe had a bit of an accident and you're having that clean slate each time means that you are you're able to start fresh each time that you see that person, which
Hmm.
sure I
Right.
can imagine. I imagine that if you had to have someone like that in your family, that can be quite trying as well. But it then also made me think that in
Hmm.
essence that is the epitome of a non-judgmental relationship, because all your past sins are just completely wiped away, completely forgotten, and you get to start fresh.
Hmm. Hmm.
And in actual fact, if we were able to, coming back to the information around our topic around honesty, if we were able to be honest with ourselves as to what it is we wanted, and honest enough to recognize where that intention is coming from, because I think that's a big part of it as well. Is it coming from the intention to serve my higher good? If we're open and honest with that, and we also then invite into our circle people who are honest about their highest intention, then you're able to approach things from a
Hmm.
non-judgmental perspective. Then you're able to approach it from a
Yes,
live and let live perspective. I think that so much of
that's right.
judgment in our lives, so much of dishonesty inside ourselves stems from, well, like we were saying, wanting to
Hmm.
please others, but also because we've been so dishonest internally as to what we actually need and want out of life that we can often fall into a trap of
Right.
self sabotage and self destruction. I don't know if that
Yes.
resonates at all.
That's so true. Oh, absolutely. And what ends up happening is it ends up affecting all of our current decisions and our future
Mm,
decisions. And it can end up pulling us down, because maybe we're not following our path, right? So if we're not following our true path, then how can we be honest with ourselves? We're not being honest with ourselves. And here's the other thing is that, doesn't God say that our body is the temple? Our body is the temple of Christ. We are the temple of God's source. We were given life to to live it, and to, as you say, be true to be our best self. So
hmm.
if we're not doing that, then we're not respecting ourselves, and we're not allowing our I don't know if you want to call it sanctification, or allowing our the honor of who we are to work through us and in our lives, and um, to be this optimum human being that's mastering their life course. We're selling ourselves short, right? Didn't you say something about that at the beginning? We're
Yeah,
selling
yeah.
ourselves short. And that's the worst thing that we can be doing,
Oh, absolutely. So
because we're
something
not
else that
being true
just
to
occurred to me
ourselves.
now around this whole, what exactly what you were just saying about the body being the temple, right? Is I was just
Hmm.
instantly thinking, isn't it so odd that, or not odd, interesting, I should say, that in the world in which we live in, if you grew up a Christian, the Bible says very clearly, fear God and give him glory, for this is the whole obligation of man, right? Now, what I find interesting about that is we then have decided over the millennia to add things to that, to define what fearing God and giving him glory entails and means. But it's not true. Okay? It's
Right.
different for each person because each person is their own temple of God.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to express their
That's right.
love and devotion for their creator in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not talking about
In
any form
different
of
ways. Yeah.
self-destruction or anything like that, but it is very much up to the person if they're able to have that inner trust, that inner honesty, that inner dialogue as to how they're going to express
Mm-hmm.
that out into the world and into the universe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really it's very closely linked with authenticity. So we need to be authentic. So
Mm,
um let's say someone, you really want to love someone, you have so this like overwhelming power of love for another human being, and it could be anyone, right? It could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be anyone, and you have this overwhelming love for them in a sense of purity. Do you know what I'm saying? Like pure
mhm.
love, like
Yes,
brotherly love.
I think
But
the Greeks
they're
called it agape.
always uh agape, yes. And yet they don't know how to receive that love for whatever reason.
Hmm.
They're hurt, they could have resentment towards you, it could have nothing to do with you, but all we can then do is continue to show our love and share our love whenever we can. And if they don't receive it, they may never, then that is the way that it is, right? And we just have to accept that. But does it mean that we stop, calling once in a while to check on them, or saying hello, or sending them a gif that's encouraging? No, we continue to be that person in who we are, because guess what? When we move on into the next world, we're the ones that have to answer for our actions, right? So, we can be forgiven, just as we forgive on the earth. But when we go on, that, our life is going to be shown before us. They call that
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
judgment seat, whereby we're met by a council. And I was actually shown this many years ago, the Council of Six, and they're a bunch of bearded men that have never incarnated on the earth before, and they basically are like, they're guides for us when we cross over, and like a consultant, and they show us, everything that's happened in our lives, to show us, you know what we've done and what we could have possibly done differently, and that sort of thing, right? So we're the ones that have to answer to that. You mentioned accountability earlier. We're the
Hmm.
ones that have to get up every morning and be accountable for, you know what we've said and done the day before, right? So there's always this vying to be a better person. We should always be, because we can't change 1 second ago, but always vying to be this best person that we can be every day when we wake up, right? To be better than the previous day in whatever ways that we can. And that helps us with that whole new beginning, right? It's like the Mayans. Do you remember when there was that whole upheaval about, I think it was 2012, and they were talking about, oh, the world's coming to an end and all this stuff, and everyone's, running with this. But really, what we came to find out was that the Mayan calendar was finishing and a new calendar was beginning with a blank page, right? So when you think of a blank page, what does that say to you? How does that resonate with you? You
When I
know,
think about a blank
some
page,
people,
it just automatically brings up endless possibilities, just the ability to create
Exactly.
whatever you
Right.
want.
Right.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
that was the look at the difference in interpretation. People were running with this, baton saying, "Oh my God, the world's coming to an end," and people were literally fearful and they were stocking up on, all kinds of stuff. But really, the flip side of that is, like you said, a blank page is a new beginning, right? It's an opportunity for all kinds of wonderful opportunities and blessings. So we have choice, and that's part of that whole piece, is that we need to choose. We want to choose optimistically. There's nothing
Mm.
wrong with having optimism, because we need to choose optimistically so that we can become a better person, right?
So I think that actually segues so beautifully in what I was going to ask you next, which is because the title of today's episode is Broken Wings. And I think on a lot of people's minds is, well, how can I heal my wings? How can I, have strong, powerful wings to take me up to the heights that I deserve to achieve? And I think so much of that is to realize that each day is a gift and a blank slate. You can literally write your own destiny each and every day. And not just each and
That's
every
right.
day, every hour, every minute. You have the power to shift and to change that. How
That's
does that
right.
sort of.
And the other cool thing about that is that we have an opportunity to, like you say, we have a blank slate. The other piece to that is momentum. So
Mm,
let's say that you get some really amazing news yesterday, and you are running with it. You are ecstatic. You are so excited. You just got a promotion at work, say, right? So that means a raise. Maybe you're moving to a bigger city, whatever it entails. Then you're so excited that you're just like, by the end of the day, you're exhausted, because it just, like, your adrenaline is pumping, and it's on a roll.
mm-hmm,
So you go to bed at night, you wake up the next morning, and you're exhausted. So then you get a phone call that, I don't know, a bill is due, or something happened to someone that and there's a negative energy cyclical thing happening. It's really important in that moment to recognize what's going on. It's
mm-hmm.
remember, you talked about the polarities before. So recognizing that, oh, now we're in this energy polarity. We need to shift that energy back to the positive and the optimistic again. So then we can say, how can I turn this situation around, right? How can I redirect that energy so that I pull it back into that vortex of optimism, and pull yourself back into that momentum to keep it going? I think this is part of what happens sometimes energetically. We don't even realize it's going on until
Mm.
we catch it. So it's really important to catch it, because you had mentioned that earlier, that, when you noticed that you were internalizing some of those lessons that you had learned as a child, it was really important for you to come back to this honesty piece and pull yourself into a different space, right? And so we have to do that daily, right? It's something that we have to be aware of, cognizant of, and do for ourselves daily.
Absolutely. So it's so interesting that you bring that up as well, Rain, because just today I was having a session with a client who has gone through a really rough patch over the last sort of 6 to 8 weeks. It's just literally been one thing after another. And she was not really, but she was beating herself up a little bit about it as well, and going, I feel like I could have done certain things better, etc. And I went, okay, stop. I want you to write out a sheet of paper today with all the negatives that have happened over the last 6 weeks. Every single part of it. And I won't go into details, obviously, for privacy reasons. But I said, write out every single negative thing that's happened and any subheadings or whatever around the main negatives. And then I want you to figure out what the lesson was that you picked up from those negatives. And then I want you to recognize that whilst you may not see it right here, right now, in a year's time, those lessons that you've managed to learn will make you a different person, and quite possibly and quite probably a better person. So that negative now becomes a positive because it's made you stronger. It's taught you something. It's given you more knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
more wisdom
Yeah.
about who you are and how you handle things. And she just went, that's
Yeah.
actually kind of amazing. And it was a good reminder for myself as well that, just because something doesn't quite go your way, just because you're feeling like you have broken wings, doesn't mean you can't re-empower yourself
Mm-hmm.
by taking that negative,
That's
looking at
right.
it very honestly, and going, okay, this happened. I can't undo it. It's in the past. But what can I learn from it?
Mm-hmm.
What can I take away? How can I
Right.
use this to strengthen myself?
And sometimes we don't have control over those things that happen, obviously,
Hmm.
because we wouldn't choose. We wouldn't necessarily choose for those negative things to happen because we want the candy store. We want to have fun all the time and we want it good all the time. So when those things do happen, you're right. It's an opportunity to learn and to grow through the experience and to pull yourself into a different mindset, to being optimistic, to looking at things from a different perspective. And it's when we shift, you're talking about shifting. So it's when we
Hmm.
shift our perspective, when we shift our emotions. Now we're moving into a different train of thought and emotion, and our energy can be swooped up into that, and we can literally then change the course of our lives. You're right. we
Yep.
can we can we can you know say a person is laid off from their job, maybe their economic conditions, right, cause that to happen. So okay, it's not something that they caused themselves, but how can they look at that differently and roll with it, and now look at the opportunities that might come now because of those changes and the growth that they would go through to maybe come into new opportunities, come into a better place. Maybe they'll end up linking up with a job that is better suitable for them, or perhaps they might decide to start their own business. There's all kinds of possibilities in that.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's about all of that.
I can't help but feel as though all of this just wraps up so beautifully in honesty being the best policy, because we really do, and I do this all the time myself. I was doing it today and yesterday as well. We lie to ourselves. We tell ourselves all the time when something
Yes.
negative happens that that this is either the end of the
Yeah.
world, or this is so horrible, and da 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 da, and we just
Hmm.
refuse to see the flip side of that coin. It's the most bizarre
Yeah.
thing. And
That's
yet
a
when
good
we
point, Stefan. Really good point.
yeah, and thank you. And then when we do finally manage to be honest, brutally honest about a situation, and see it
Hmm.
as neither negative or positive, but just that it is, because a situation or an experience
Hmm.
doesn't actually hold polarity, it simply is. Our reaction is what gives it polarity. When we're able to accept that and realize it,
Hmm.
now you can actually see both sides of that coin. And that is
Yeah.
just so empowering. And I'd like to actually thank you for bringing that up,
You know,
because you sent me on this tangent that has kind of re empowered me. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And Esther Hicks talks about contrast. So we talk about the polarity, and she talks
Hmm.
about contrast. She's written many books, and they do a lot of podcasts. Um, or actually, they're more like a, a presentation, a live presentation. But she talks about how we need that contrast to be
Mm,
able to see, more clearly what we want and what we don't want, right?
yes.
And so it's so funny because sometimes when we go through those experiences that you're talking about, we go, yeah, but I already knew I didn't want that. Why would I be having this experience, or why would I be having this experience again? Because I know I don't want that. But it's not only always about us, for one, right? There's other people involved, other situations involved. And sometimes the lesson isn't always for us. Sometimes people are experiencing contrast through our experiences, right? Um, so that they can see more clearly. And we always learn from that and grow ourselves, regardless, even if we're going through another experience yet again, because we may see something that we didn't quite see before, or we may get the courage to take that leap of, into our dreams, or that leap of faith into
Mm,
something else, um, that is a better fit for us, or that's a better path for us, finally, because we needed to go through that experience one more time to really get, that knock on the head, right?
absolutely.
So it's okay, it's all okay.
So, as we start to wrap up this episode now, I would actually like to suggest a topic for our next discussion because you brought something up about experiencing contrast through somebody else's experience. And just this morning, I got up and I was making my coffee and I switched on the news and I was watching a segment on um, the refugees now trying to get out of Afghanistan and what has happened there, and just how awful some of the terrible things that have occurred
Yeah.
there. And I was absolutely
Yes.
heartbroken by that. But it's so interesting then when you were just saying now that perhaps me experiencing that contrast, that polarity, looking at the awful state of affairs, right, is actually a way for me to go, okay, well, how can I change the world around me in my immediate vicinity? Because we know it's ripple effects, right? Ripples
Hmm.
out to get it to the
Right.
point
Right.
where we don't have these horrific atrocities happening over and over and over and over again.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that could be a topic for our
Yeah.
next podcast. But
Oh,
I would,
yes, that's huge. I mean,
yeah.
that
So you were going to say, Rain?
well, I was just going to say that, that's huge. I mean, because it's such a big situation, we can often feel that helplessness, right? So we can, yeah,
Mm,
we can definitely talk about that, um, next show for
absolutely.
sure.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, any closing thoughts on today's episode? Broken wings, honesty and trust. Where do we end and where do we begin?
Well, I think just to summarize what we've already said is, be honest with yourself, be true to
Mm,
yourself, be true to who you are, and that means true to your heart, true to your emotions. Um, when we are true to ourselves, then we can be better friends to others. We can be a better confidants to others. We are just a better person overall. And the other point would be, when we are faced with challenges, to move into that space where we can pull it back to optimism and into
hmm.
that momentum, into a positive momentum.
I like that. I think my final closing thought would just be to remember that honesty, no matter how painful, is incredibly empowering. if we have that internally happening for
Yes.
us, it can empower us hugely. Oh, I've
Yes,
got
it
some
can.
work to go and do
Because
actually.
anything that disempowers us, if it's disempowering us, then it's not healthy and it's not good.
No,
So we
absolutely.
want to get through that mud, and then we want to empower ourselves for sure.
For sure, for sure. Well, Rain, thank you so much.
That's
As
my
always,
final thought.
been...
Thank you so
Oh,
much, Stefan, for having me.
no, thank you, thank you. And for the reminders today, because it really has been just incredible to remember that I do have that ability to empower myself as well. So I really appreciate that.
You
From
do.
us here at Unprecedented, we have been Rain and Steph, and we look forward to our next episode next week. Have a great day wherever you are in the world, and remember to go out and empower yourselves. Thank you. Good evening, good morning, or good night.